Hiya! So it's story time with me, the Reverend Helen Houston. I'm chaplain at Brown House. So the story today, the Elves and the Shoemaker. Now this was a story that my mum used to read me and I really like it. I hope you do too. Here goes. Once upon a time there lived a shoemaker and his wife. The man was a good shoemaker and he worked hard, yet he and his wife were very poor. As time went on, they grew poorer and poorer. At last the day came when all the shoemaker had left was one piece of leather. It would make only one pair of shoes. That evening, before he went to bed, the shoemaker cut out a pair of shoes from the leather. Then he left them on his workbench, all ready for him to sew the next morning. As they were going upstairs, the shoemaker spoke sadly to his wife. "I've used my last piece of leather," he said. "I've cut out one pair of shoes. Tomorrow I will sew them, and when they're sold, I don't know what'll become of us." The next morning, the shoemaker got up early and went into his workshop, ready to make the shoes. On his bench, instead of the leather that he'd cut out, he found a pair of shoes, already made. He was astonished and didn't know what to think. Look, here are the shoes. Do you see they're nice, pretty pink ones? The shoemaker took the shoes in his hands and looked carefully at them. They were neatly made with not one bad stitch. He showed the shoes to his wife, who said, "I've never seen a pair of shoes so well made. They're perfect." The shoemaker and his wife couldn't think who'd sewn the shoes. Anyway, the same morning, a lady came into the shop to buy a pair of shoes. Look, she's a very posh lady. There you are. Doesn't she look pretty? And look, the pink shoes go with her pink clothes. The shoemaker showed her the pair he'd found on his bench, and she said, "I have never seen such well-made shoes." The lady tried on the shoes. They fitted her perfectly. She was so pleased with them that she paid the shoemaker twice the usual price. With the money, the shoemaker was able to buy leather for 2 pairs of shoes. That night, before he went to bed, he cut out 2 pairs of shoes and he left them on his workbench, all ready for him to sew in the morning. The next morning, the shoemaker got up early and went into his shop to make the shoes. But he had no need to do so, because on his bench he found the 2 pairs of shoes already made. Look, here they are. Green shoes and red shoes. Do you have any green shoes or red shoes? Pretty colours, aren't they? Well, he took the shoes in his hands and looked carefully at them. And once more he found that they were neatly made with not one bad stitch in them. That morning, a man came into the shop to buy some shoes. The shoemaker showed him the 2 pairs of shoes he had found on his bench. The man said, "I have never seen such well-made shoes before." And he was so pleased with them that he bought both pairs of shoes, and he paid the shoemaker twice the usual price. Well, with the money the shoemaker was able to buy leather this time for 4 pairs of shoes. Look. And so he did as he'd done before. Late at night, he cut out the patterns for the shoes and left it on the workbench ready for him to sew in the morning. And then, next thing in the morning, he got up early, went to make the shoes, but he didn't need to. They'd already been made for him. And once more he found that they were neatly made with not one bad stitch in them. And so it went on. Every night the shoemaker cut out some shoes and left them on his workbench, and every morning he found the shoes all neatly made. Many rich customers came to his shop to buy these perfect shoes. So in time the shoemaker and his wife, as well as becoming very busy, became very rich. Look at all those people in the shop. And yet the shoemaker and his wife still didn't know who was making all these perfect shoes. So one evening, not long before Christmas, when the shoemaker had finished cutting out shoes, he went to his wife. "We still don't know who sews the shoes for us," he said. "Shall we stay up tonight to see who it is that helps us?" His wife thought this was a very good idea. So she lit a candle and they went into the workshop. They hid themselves in a corner of the room behind some clothes which were hanging there. And then the shoemaker and his wife waited quietly and watched to see what happened. But here they are. Can you see? The shoemaker's just moving the curtain so he and his wife can hide there. Well, for a long time, nothing happened. And then, just as the clock struck 12, the door of the workshop opened quietly, and in came 2 tiny elves. They were dressed in old clothes and their feet were bare. They didn't see the shoemaker and his wife, who were hiding in the corner watching them. Look. Can you see? The elves are starting to get work on the shoes. They jumped up onto the workbench, took up the shoes and began to stitch and sew and hammer. They worked so neatly and so quickly that the shoemaker could hardly believe his eyes. The elves didn't stop for a moment until all the cut-out shoes were finished, and then they ran quickly away. If you look at this picture again, you'll see the shoemaker and his wife just peeping out from behind the curtains. The next morning at breakfast, the shoemaker asked his wife, "How can we thank these little elves who've made us so rich and so happy?" "I know what we can do," said his wife. "We can make them some shoes and some clothes, because their own clothes are so ragged, and did you see their feet were bare?" During the evenings that followed, the shoemaker and his wife began to make new clothes for the elves. The shoemaker chose the softest leather he could find. He cut out 2 of the tiniest pairs of shoes you have ever seen. Then he stitched the shoes as carefully as ever he could. Meanwhile, the shoemaker's wife cut out 2 white shirts, 2 small green jackets, and 2 pairs of trousers to match. She sewed them with tiny stitches. She made 2 little caps for their heads, each with a little feather in. And she also knitted 2 pairs of wee white stockings. Well, by Christmas Eve, the tiny clothes and shoes were finished. The shoemaker cleared the leather and the tools from his workbench, and he and his wife laid their presents on the bench instead of the usual work. Then they hid themselves as they had done before and waited to see what the elves would do. Look, can you see on the workbench here? These are the clothes that they made for the elves. Do you have any green clothes? I'm not sure if I have green clothes. They look very pretty though. Well, just as the clock struck 12, the door opened quietly, as before, and the 2 elves came running in. They were still wearing those old clothes of theirs, and their feet were blue with cold. They jumped onto the bench ready to get to work at once. But to their astonishment, there wasn't any work for them to do. Instead, there were only tiny clothes. In this picture I'm going to show you now, you can see the elves look really puzzled. The elves were astonished, and then they were absolutely delighted. And in no time at all, they were out of their old clothes, talking and laughing, and they dressed themselves in the beautiful new clothes, the green jacket and trousers, the white shirt and stockings, the soft leather shoes, and the little caps with the feathers that nodded as they laughed. Look, you can see how happy they are in this picture. In their delight, the little elves skipped and jumped over chairs and benches, and then they joined hands and danced around as they sang, "Now we are boys so fine to see, we need no longer cobblers be." And at last they danced happily out of the door. Look, there they go. The shoemaker and his wife never saw the little elves again. But from that time, good luck was always with them. They were rich and happy for the rest of their lives. So I hope you enjoyed that story. Another one, another time. Thanks for watching. Bye.